Okay, let's go through and create a Hugo-based website, and we're going to do continuous deployment via AWS. So this is, I would say, almost a skill in itself. You could get a job doing this. You could become a content management architect for a huge company like New York Times or maybe Wall Street Journal using these skills. So let's get into it first and go over to Cloud9. And I'm going to go to the console here, find Cloud9. And I'm going to create a new workspace here. So I'm going to say Hugo deploy. Go ahead and set this up. And then from here, I'm just, so that it'll be a little bit faster, going to use a larger instance, but I'm going to leave everything default here and go ahead to go to the next step and create this environment. And once this gets set up, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go through and download a version of Hugo. And so the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go to the latest Hugo releases. And while that's opening up here, I can open up in another tab and look at Hugo releases. Here we go. And here's a specific version. That looks good. And what I can do is I can actually download it specifically from this link here. So if I click on downloads, you can go through and look at all the different downloads. So I can actually do a wget command though, and I'll do that inside of the Cloud9 environment. So I'm going to open this up a little bit here, and I'm going to type in this wget command. And I will change this because there's actually a slightly new version of Hugo. Let's do 3.0. And let's see if this works. Okay. And we'll add a Z there. There we go. So now I've got that a tar zip file local downloaded. You can see it right here in Cloud9. And the next step that I'm going to do is I'm going to basically untar that file. So the way you do that is you type in tar xzvf, and then this Hugo file. It can autocomplete. There we go. And then I'm going to create a bin directory. So let's go ahead and make a bin directory, and then I'm going to move that into that directory for me. There we go. And let's see here. So I had a typo. So I just need to, let's see here. Let's do this. I need to, instead of doing that, I will type in move Hugo. Actually, we've got it in our directory here, so we're good. Now what I can do is I can move Hugo into a that bin directory. So I'll go /bin like that. There we go. And now if I type in which Hugo, you should see it's basically inside of here. So I can actually just get rid of these files now. I can get rid of this tar file and get rid of this license file, and then get rid of this README. Okay, great. So we're all set here. And again, I've already done which Hugo. So this tells me that I have a Hugo binary. Typically what I'll do to make sure that this Hugo binary is working is I'll type in Hugo version, and you can see that I've got that version of Hugo, which is 63.0. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is go through and create a new Hugo website. And so I'm going to basically follow a quick start guide from the Hugo website, but essentially what we would do is go through and run this command here, Hugo new site, quick site. So let's go ahead and run this. So I'm going to clear the screen here like that. Okay, and then the next thing that we'll do is we'll cd into that directory, and then I'll run git init. And what this does is makes an empty git repo. And now I'm going to tell it to add submodules. And the reason why we want to do this I'll say git add submodule, and then I'll put in the name of a theme. And this allows me to link into any kind of Hugo theme. So if you wanted to change this, for example, and put in some different theme, this is where you would swap that out. Okay, that looks like that works. And then I can actually just echo out that into the config file that I'm going to later change a little bit. Perfect. Now that I've got that set up, really the next step here is I'm going to create a first new post here. Okay, that looks good. And the next step is really to run it locally. Now there's one little trick that we're going to need to do here is we're going to need to tell Cloud9 itself that it's okay to open up port 8080. So I'm going to go to the console in AWS, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to look down here for the security groups, and I'm going to find the name of that instance that I have set up here. So it should be Hugo deploy, right? So we see Hugo deploy, so it's going to be Hugo deploy. And in fact, it'll even be really handy. It'll create a name there for you. So if I click on that, I'm going to go through and I'm going to click on the inbound port. And you can notice I can SSH into Cloud9, but I can't listen to any other ports. So what I'm going to do is edit, and then I will add a rule, and we'll say custom TCP rule, and I'm going to say port 8080. And then from here, I'll leave all that the same, and maybe I'll add a note here, Hugo development, so that I remember what I did. Great, that looks like it works. I can go back now to Cloud9, and I can run this command that shows me what my IP address is. So there's a lot of ways to figure that out, but this is an easy way. I can see that my IP address is that IP address. Okay, well, what I can do now is I can run hugoserve, and this will actually let me preview my site. So from here, I'm going to swap out the IP address to the IP address that is showing right here, and it's going to be different for you. So you're going to want to put in whatever your IP address is. Okay, and take off that quote there. And so what this command does is it says serve this out on port 8080, and then make sure that you rewrite the URLs so that this always is referring to this host name, so that I can demo and do development on the fly. So if I run that, you can see it's running, and then all I have to do is just take this URL here and copy it and put this into another tab. There we go. Got this thing running. There's my new Hugo site. And then also what I can do is if I go back to this location here, you can see where the different posts would show up. So the reason why this post is not showing up is that I need to basically change this post so that it won't be a draft. So I'm going to edit this, and notice how it says draft true. I'm going to change draft false, and then I'm going to say my first post in Cloud9. And what's cool about this is it's on the fly reading these markdown files, and then it's actually going to make that change. So there you go. You can see, and if I click on it, I get the full rewrite and everything. So basically, we have a full development environment. You could just start building out your website, and we're good to go. So this is the easy part. Now we're going to get into a slightly more complex part, which is we're going to check this into source control, and then we're going to set up an auto deployment system. So the next thing that we want to do here is that we want to create an S3 bucket. So I'm going to go to Amazon again here, and I'm going to create an S3 bucket. Here we go. And from here, it can be just any random bucket. I'll just call this Hugo screencast, and even put Duke, and then we'll say next, and then I'll just say next again. I will want public access, so I'll turn that off. I acknowledge it, and then we'll say next, and then next. So I've created that bucket. I'm going to then find it, and I'm going to change it into a static hosted website. You could also attach this to a fully qualified domain name later and set up a real website. This is just going to be a website that has an AWS based name. Okay, that looks good. We can say index.html here. And And then also I can say save. Now, once I've set that up, the only other thing I need to do is I need to set up a bucket policy so that everything that's created in there will always be publicly available. So how do I do that? Well, I can go to here, this overview section, and go to permissions and set bucket policy like this. And I will just put paste this inside of here. And what it says is, it says public read get object, let everybody in the world read this. And I just need to change this to be my bucket name. So I'll go here and I'll put in this bucket name. There we go. So I say save. There we go. We have public access. That's exactly what I want. Now, how do I test this out locally here? Is I'm going to have to tweak my config file locally here. So I'm going to basically stop this for a second, and I'm going to go to this config file here. And inside this config file, I'll just want to put in this website. I'm sorry, the publicly hosted bucket website. So I'm going to go back to overview, properties, static website hosting, grab this URL here, put this inside of my config file. So now it knows that that's the base URL. That looks good. And I believe it wants it with a slash at the end here. And then we'll just call this, Hugo AWS continuous deploy, or we'll call it CD, continuous delivery. And you can see this is where you would also set the theme. So that looks like it's all good to go. And now also what we're going to do is we're going to add a deployment stanza here. So what this does is that it tells us that we also can do a deploy by just using the hugo command. So I'm going to put this bucket name like this. There we go. And now what's great about this is I can run a command called hugo deploy now that it knows that information. So let's go ahead and run hugo, which will generate the files locally into a public directory, which you'll see right here. That's the static assets. And then I can type in hugo deploy. There we go, identified 14 files. And now if we go back to that website again, to this URL, if I click on it, there we go. So we've got a full round trip now. So just this alone is probably for many situations good enough, because you could go into Cloud9, you could generate a website, you could edit it in Cloud9 and maybe manually make the changes if you don't do a lot of web development. But you can do something much more sophisticated, which is automatically deploy all of your changes every single time you make a change inside of Cloud9 or any source code environment, like even editing it raw on GitHub. So that's what we're going to do next, is we're going to get into setting up a full continuous deployment. So how do we do that? First, we're going to have to check it into GitHub. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new repo, and we'll just call this Hugo Screencast like that. And I can just say this is a demo project, a demo Hugo Screencast site. There we go. I'm going to put in a README file here like this. And inside, I'll just put in Go, because there's some Go things that I'm doing. And we'll say create repo. Great, that looks good. Now, the next thing I'm going to do here is that I'm going to check this. I'm going to check this code out locally. And so in order to do that, what I can do is I can add this as a remote. And so I'm going to go back to this repo here, and I'm going to run this command, get remote add origin. So basically this says, look, I have a place where I want to put this code, and I want to put it over here. So I'm going to go to this section, copy this like that, and then I'm going to go ahead and put this in. Now, there is one gotcha before I do this, is that we're going to have to set up access to be able to read and write back and forth to this repo. And in fact, we want to do that via SSH. So let me swap this over to SSH, copy this before we make that change. And let's go ahead and do that. Get remote at origin. There we go. And now what I can do is if I say get remote -v, you can see that it's set up. So let's go ahead and set up those SSH keys before I forget. Get it's SSH dash keygen dash T RSA, push return a bunch of times. Look at this file here. So I run cat, and I will cat this out. There we go. Now I'm going to take this file, and I'm going to go back to GitHub, go to my profile, go to settings, and add this as an SSH key right here. Okay, we'll call this Hugo screencast. Perfect. Confirm the password. Okay, so we're pretty much ready to go. The next thing that we're going to need to do though is push these changes into our repo. So to do that, what I'm going to do is say get status here, and you can see that there's a couple things that are gotchas that I want to make you aware of. Is this public directory is something we never want to commit because it's auto-generated static files by Hugo. So a couple things I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this get ignore the file. I'm going to do a get pull first, but when I pull, I'm going to tell it to pull from a unallowed unrelated history. So I'm basically going to do this. I'm going to run this command. This is a little bit tricky here, but basically it says get pull allow unrelated histories, and we'll make our initial connection. Then we'll run this command, which is basically let's see here, get status. Let's do this. Let's do a get ignore. And then inside this get ignore, let's add this public so that we don't get ourselves into trouble. Perfect. And now I should be able to do a commit. But actually, before I do the commit, I just wanted to make sure that when we do a get status here, that it's not going to try to write in that public. Okay, great. We got that. But I also want to make a makefile to just clean this up. So I'll do a touch makefile here. And then inside this makefile, let's make something that just allows us to clean up our changes real quick by deleting things. So the way to do that would be to add a statement like this. So inside this makefile, we can do that. Clean, remove that public directory. Great, that looks good. Actually, we should change this to convert to tabs. Just make files like tabs. Okay, perfect. Let's say make clean. All right, so it deleted all that stuff. If I do a get status, you'll see that these are the different things. So I'm going to say get add dot get ignore here. Ignore, and then I'm also going to say get add everything, and then I'm going to do a get commit and say adding Hugo site. Perfect. We'll do a get push. Okay, let's go ahead and try that command here. There we go. So it said it wants us to do a pull again. So let's go ahead and do this pull. I just use the up arrow. That looks good. And then I can say get branch set upstream. There we go. And now I can do a get push. Actually, get pull. And then it says there's a conflict. So let's go ahead and fix that conflict. Sure. We don't want that. There we go. Fix the conflict. Get pull. Get status. Get add. Get ignore. git ignore, git commit, fixing merge. So you can see there's some things that happen that are a little irritating with Git, and there's probably a cleaner way to do this, but let's go ahead and add my name in here. So really, in a way, Git is the most complex part of this whole setup. So let's go ahead and say Noah Gift. All right. And then we'll add in my email address. And then we'll reset the author. Write this out. Exit. There we go. Finally got this thing. So this happens. I stumble a lot. I don't always use all these advanced Git commands, so it's normal to have some stumbling there. Next up, we'll go to the repo that I just created, which is Hugo. Let's just verify that we see it in there. Hugo screencast. And inside you can see I just created all that stuff. So this looks like a good environment here. So what do we do next here? The next step would be that we want to actually set up a continuous delivery using CodePipeline, or code build. So I'm going to go now to AWS again, and I'm going to create one more tab here. So I'm going to go to AWS and open up a new tab. And I'm going to type in code build like that. And under code build, this is another thing just to be aware of, is make sure that you're using the same region that you created your bucket in, or else you can have some issues. So I've actually got a bunch of Hugo sites already building here. I'm going to create a new one from scratch. Say create build. We'll call this Hugo screencast. There we go. And you can do fancy things like build projects and everything. I'm going to leave everything default. And now here's the source provider. I'm going to select GitHub, and I'm also going to select private repo in my GitHub. And then I'm going to put in the name of that project here. So I believe I called it Hugo. Let's see if we can just copy that part of it. Hugo screencast. Let's put that in there and see if I can find it. Hugo, there we go, Hugo screencast. Now notice there's a couple things here that are interesting, that we can set up rebuild every time a code change is pushed to this repository. So that's a yes, please. I do want that. I want that. So essentially, now it's going to be automatically deploying for me. And again, what's cool about this is that I can now use this as essentially a safety mechanism. Now here, this next section here, what we're going to do is we're going to use one that Amazon provides. I think that's always a smart move. I'm going to pick Amazon Linux, and for runtime, we'll pick standard. For the image, I'll pick the latest image here. And then for this flag we don't need, but if later you wanted to do continuous deployment with a more complex project, you could enable that. I'm going to create a new service role, and this will give me the ability to write the changes to the S3 bucket. So that looks good. Remember, that's the name of our service role. Great. I'm also going to tell it that I want to use infrastructure as code. So I'm going to use this build spec file to actually do all of my steps. All right, that all looks good here. So I'm going to go ahead and say create build project. And so once this build project is created, the only real step is next step here is that we need to go in and create the privileges. So we need to create a role and tell our AWS account it's okay for this build server to write changes to S3. And so I'm going to click on build details. I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm going to go to service role. There we go. There's our service role. When I click on the service role, there's a couple things to think about. One is that because we're rapidly prototyping and I'm doing a screencast, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a shortcut. I'm going to click on attach policies, and I'm going to just give it admin access. And I think that's relatively okay, depending on what you're doing. especially for like a build server. A lot of times having admin access is not a bad idea, but later you could actually specifically granularly give this build process control to only do something. And it just reduces the chance that your machine will have problems or do something incorrect or have a security problem. But this looks like it's good. We now have basically the ability to do anything on AWS. And if I go back now to this project, the way I could test this out, which is kind of cool, is I'm going to go back to this project, and let's see if I can edit this post. Let's see. Let's refresh this. I thought I made a change to that. Okay, drafted, and I'm going to put some notes here and say this should auto deploy. Let's see if this works. And I'm going to do a get status here, get add. Star git commit. Does this push the change? And let's see, git push. And in theory, this should automatically build. I don't know if you have to click on it once to build it. Oh, there we go. You can see it's automatically building here. And what's cool about this is if I click on it, I can actually tail the log files on the fly. So I can see exactly what AWS is actually doing. And let's go ahead and check this thing out. And if we got everything correct, we have a full continuous delivery pipeline set up with Hugo. Oh, we missed something. Okay, we did not put a build YAML file. So not a problem, easy to do, easy to miss. And this again points out why a build server is so powerful. It tells you exactly what the problem is. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Hugo here, and I'm going to touch buildspec.yaml. And that's the infrastructure as code that tells our build server to do what it needs to do. So I'm going to take a file here that I've created in the past, and I'm just going to paste this in just like a cooking show. Let's go to buildspec.yaml, pull our cookies out of the oven. Here we go. And what this does is it says use this version of Hugo as a variable. This is just some boilerplate code that tells it what version of Docker. And then this right here downloads the latest version of Hugo. We remove some things, and then we put Hugo inside this container. And then I remove the public directory, regenerate the HTML files, and then do a deploy. So the only thing I need to do now, which is again really cool with this continuous delivery style of working, is again I just add it and it'll build it. So I say git add. Now commit this, adding it, we'll call this IAC, adding infrastructure as code, and then a git push. And then again, I just go back to my build server, and I should just see it checking out a second build. And let's see, is it doing it? There we go. There's our second build. Look, it says build number 2. And this time it should, in theory, do a continuous deployment. Again, I can go to tail logs, check this thing out, and if we get lucky, we're almost done. And then the only other step would be to look at the website and make sure that the change was deployed. All right, finalizing the phase. Okay, ooh, that's a good sign. Looks like it succeeded. Okay, this is fingers crossed. So let's go take a look at our S3 bucket. There we go. That's the screencast website. Read more. And it looks like, did we put anything else in there? So it looks like the deployment should be working, but let's just double check here and let's make a let's make a change here. And also the other thing to be aware of is that you a lot of times might have to open up an incognito browser to see your changes as well. So here's an incognito browser. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one more change here just to double check. And this is how I would typically. So yeah, this is the part that I thought it should be deployed. Let's take a look at this. This should auto deploy. Let's make one more thing. This is one more step like that. And then let's look at the status here. Add this, commit it, adding new content, Okay, let's see if this works. We push it, go back again to our build process here. We should see now build step 3. There we go, in progress. And let's just double check everything. Looks like it should be working. So yeah, it should be auto deploying this new change here. And again, I can look at the build step and see exactly what it's doing. Finalizing the changes. Okay. And it says identifying 2 files to upload, skipping success. And now if I go back again to that bucket, let's go, I'm going to open this, I'm going to grab this bucket again. So it doesn't look like it's deploying that change. So we might have to tweak things a little bit, but basically this is the heart and soul of doing the continuous deployment system. We've got this round trip and we're good to go.